guys, I am Joy and you're watching my YouTube channel Universal Joy. In this video, we will be talking about the basic differences between the obstructive disease and restrictive disease. So we'll be learning about those two differences of the obstructive disease and restrictive disease. But before moving into the video, if you are new to this channel, then your first task, your first honors is going to be to get yourself subscribed to our channel and also hit that bell icon below as well so that you don't miss any single video of our channel. Now, without wasting too much of time, without much further ado, let us just get back into the main lecture of our today's video. Now, in this video, we'll be talking about the differences between restrictive disease and obstructive disease. But before moving into the depth of this video, first of all, you should have a good clear concept and clear idea about the normal condition and the normal volume of the lung. So I should be starting with that particular issue first. So let us just assume that this is the figure of the normal lung, and we all know lung is made up of which cell? Obviously lung is made up of parenchymal cells. So let us just assume that this circular blackish marks represent that these are the parenchymal cells of the lung, which ultimately forms the lung. Okay, and between the two parenchymal cells, these reddish circular marks indicate the airways. So definitely the lung will have the airways, which will allow certain passage of the air to either flow into the lung or flow out of the lung. So this is a basic figure of the normal lung. Now, as a good student, you must have a good question, or you must be very much inquisitive about knowing the fact that how does this lung maintain its volume during inspiration and also during expiration, because you know that lung always maintains a certain constant value or constant volume both during inspiration and also during expiration. But how does it maintain its normal volume? Because you see, lung always inflates during inspiration. So during inspiration, it moves outward or it expands. So it should keep on expanding during inspiration, but it doesn't do that. On the other hand, lung always deflates during the time of the expiration. So it should keep on deflating during the time of the expiration, but it doesn't do that. Why doesn't it do that? Because there are two different forces which act on this lung simultaneously against each other's direction. And those two forces are going to be represented like this way. One is inward force, the other is outward force. So basically, this inward force, it is due to the elastic recoil tendency of the lung, and this outward force, it is exerted by the chest wall. So both these two forces, okay, simultaneously act on the lung against each other's direction on the same magnitude. That is the major reason why lung always maintains a constant volume, due to which lung neither deflates too much nor nor expands outward too much. This is the major reason why lung maintains its normal volume or the normal condition during both inspiration and expiration. Now, what are the features that we will find out in case of the restrictive disease and the obstructive disease? So we have to learn those two features first of all. So let us just assume that this is a lung which is observed in the restrictive disease, and obviously these are the parenchymal cells which ultimately make up this lung. Okay, and these parenchymal cells will be found out to be a little more abnormal. Okay, and these are the airways, but the problem is not with the airways in the restrictive disease. Okay, so you could see the difference between the size of these two lungs. It seems to be a little smaller as compared to the normal lung. So this is a lung with the restrictive disease, and in the restrictive disease there is no problem with the airways. So the airways almost remain the same, but the problem this time is with the parenchymal cells. So the parenchymal cells may become infected or may undergo inflammation, or the parenchymal cells, due to the inflammation, may have some fibrotic depositions of the collagenous materials, or due to the collagenous material, or due to the deposition of the collagenous materials or substances within the parenchymal cells, the whole lung may become fibrotic. So due to various reasons, the problem with the parenchymal cells will be observed, but there will be no more problem with the airways. So airways will remain the same as compared to the normal lung, but the parenchymal cells may become fibrotic, may become inflamed, may become infected, or there may be a huge amount of the deposition of the collagenous substances within the parenchymal cells, due to which lung become a little smaller as compared to the normal lung, and due to which lung also showcases stiffness. So in the restrictive disease, there will be more stiffness of the lung. Okay, that is the major reason why in the restrictive disease, in the restricted lung, we get to see stiffness. So this is one of the major features of the restrictive disease. So you have to keep that thing also in your mind. Now, as you could see, the lung is becoming more stiff. So will it become less compliant or more compliant? obviously it will become less compliant. So less compliancy will also be observed in the restrictive disease. Now when I say compliance, it means that how much are you being able to expand the lung with a certain amount of the energy inserted on the walls of the lung. That means if the lung becomes more compliant, that means with a certain amount of the energy you are being able to pull the lung outward very easily. And when the lung becomes less compliant, that means it becomes very much harder for any individual to expand the lung outward. Now you could see, as there is any fibrotic diffusion, as there is a huge amount of the deposition of the collagenous substances within the parenchymal cells, as parenchymal cells are no longer normal, that is the major reason why it becomes stiff and it becomes less compliant. That means it becomes very much difficult for any individual to pull the lung outward even during the time of the inspiration. Now this indicates the outward force remaining the same, but the inward force is right now going to be winning the battle over the outward force, which is exerted by the chest wall. So inward force, due to the more stiffness, due to the fibrotic diffusion, or due to the due to the fibrosis of the lung, the elastic recoil tendency of the lung over here will be increased or decreased. Obviously it will be increased. That is the major reason why lung will be smaller in terms of the volume as compared to the normal figure of the lung. So it will be smaller also. Lung will be smaller in size. Okay. Another thing is that over here in the restrictive disease, the problem is with the parenchymal cell or the problem is with the airway? Definitely the problem is with the parenchymal cells. So the parenchymal abnormality will be visible in the restrictive disease. Parenchymal abnormality. Okay, that means what really happens is that the airways will remain same. Airways will remain the normal, will maintain the normal condition, but the parenchymal cells will undergo either fibrosis, or parenchymal cells may become inflamed, may become infected. So the issue is with the parenchymal cells, not with the airways. Okay, so the airway will remain the same. Airway, okay, airways will become normal, but parenchymal cells will become abnormal. So these are the 5 main features which will be observed in case of the restrictive disease. However, having said that, there are other features also which we will come across later on in this video about the restrictive disease. So up to now we have learned only 5 different features about the restrictive disease. So first of all, I'm going to be giving a quick recapitulation about the restrictive disease. Here the lung is restricted because the lung is smaller in size in terms of the volume as compared to the normal lung. Lung is becoming more stiff, it is becoming less compliant. That means you have to give huge amount of the pressure and huge amount of the energy to be able to expand the lung outward. Okay, that is the major reason why it is becoming more, less compliant. Okay, and it's becoming smaller. The problem is with the parenchymal cells, so there will be abnormality in the parenchymal cells, but the airways of the restricted lung will remain the same. It will remain normal. Now, what are the features that we will find out in the obstructive diseases? Now let us just suppose that this is a lung which carries the obstructive disease features, and these are the parenchymal cells. This time the parenchymal cells will exhibit no more abnormality. Okay, but the problem is with the airways. These are the airways which become very much constricted and very much narrow in terms of the diameter, and this time the infection or the inflammation or the abnormality is with these airways, not with these parenchymal cells. Okay, and as there is obstruction in these airways, that is the major reason why it is also called as expiratory problem. It is also called as an expiratory problem. It is not related to inspiratory problem. And why is it called expiratory problem? Why is it not called inspiratory problem? I'll come to that issue. Just bear with me in this video. Now, this lung is becoming enlarged, and will it be more stiff or less stiff? As parenchymal cells remain normal in the lung, so it becomes less stiff, but as it has already enlarged in terms of the volume, so it's becoming more compliant. That means with a little effort or with a little kind of energy exerted on the border or on the wall of the lung, you can expand the lung outward. So it's becoming very easier for us to expand the lung outward. That is why it is becoming more compliant. Okay, and the problem this time is not associated with the parenchymal cells, rather the problem or abnormality is associated with the airways, because the airways are this time becoming smaller in terms of the size as compared to the normal airways of the lung. Okay, now there are certain diseases which ultimately result in the showcasing or the exhibition of this obstructive lung. What are those diseases? First of all, emphysema, which is classically well defined. Second one is going to be our asthma, and the third one is chronic bronchitis. Okay, in case of the asthma, and also in case of the emphysema, and also in case of the asthma, and in case of the disease called chronic bronchitis, these are the main three diseases which will carry this obstructive lung. That means these are the three places where there will be constriction of the airways. That means the problem will be associated with the airways, not associated with the parenchymal cells. Now, out of these three different diseases, this emphysema and this chronic bronchitis will fall under the classification of COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Okay, or in another word you can say COAD, chronic obstructive airway disease. Okay, but this asthma, it may sometimes become acute or it may become sometimes chronic. Now, if it becomes acute, then definitely asthma will not be falling under the banner of COPD. That is the major reason why classically, traditionally, we say emphysema and chronic bronchitis to be falling under the huge banner of COPD. So, asthma is not associated with COPD majorly. Now, I have to mention and elucidate why and how these airways become constricted in terms of the diameter. Okay. Now, what really happens in the chronic bronchitis is that I'm going to be giving you the true example so that you can understand the mechanism of the obstructive disease very well also. Now, let us just suppose that this is an airway which is normal at the moment. At the moment, this airway is very much normal, so it's going to allow certain amount of the air to pass through it and move into the interior part of the lung. Similarly, from the other end, it will also allow a huge good passage for the air to move out of the lung from the interior part of the lung. Okay, as it is right now normal, but I am talking about the abnormal airways. Now, if a person smokes very frequently, over and over again, or if a person is smoking for a longer period of time, then of course his airway are supposed to become abnormal. How will it become abnormal? Is that surrounding the airways, definitely there are some secretory cells. Definitely we have already come across in anatomy that there are certain glands or certain cells in our respiratory tract which by their secretion always try their utmost best to keep the respiratory tract always neat and clean. So, when a person smokes for a longer period of time, let's just suppose if there is a person who has been smoking for more than 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, then he or she will be able to intake huge amount of the carbonaceous particles or foreign particles through smoking. Now, these carbonaceous particles or these incoming toxic substances will irritate these airways, and once this irritation occurs or once these airways become irritated, then cells around this airway will become activated and they will also start secreting their secretions in huge amount. And let's just suppose these are the secretions of the cells, because the airway right now has become very much bothered or very much irritated. So, the cells surrounding the airway has produced huge amount of the secretions, and those secretions have already spilled out of their glands, and because of the secretions, the passage or the lumen of the airway right now has become obstructed. So, previously when the airway was normal, when the airway was almost in this shape, that time we had approximately 5 millimeter in terms of the diameter. The aperture's diameter was approximately 5 millimeter previously in the normal condition. But now that you could see there are some secretions surrounding this airway, so definitely the aperture's diameter, it will be falling down, and let's just suppose it has come down to 3 millimeter from 5 millimeter. So, however, having said that, these are not exact numericals, but for your betterment I'm assuming the aperture's diameter of the airway to be 5 millimeter normally, for your better understanding, okay, so that you can correlate the numericals with the airway obstruction. So prior to the abnormality, the diameter of this aperture of the airway was approximately at 5 millimeter of the mercury, rather I should be saying 5 millimeter, and as the airways right now have become totally inflamed or obstructed, or in other words you can say it has become irritated, due to which the cells surrounding the airway are producing more secretions, and due to these secretions the lumen of the airway has right now become a little smaller, and the diameter of this lumen has come down to 3 millimeter from 5 millimeter. Now will you think, or will you say it will allow the same amount of the passage of the air prior to the obstruction? Definitely the answer is going to be no. So this way the airway becomes inflamed, or the airway becomes constricted. So here, over here I have shown the constricted airways, okay, and here the lumen was big in terms of the diameter, and over here in the obstructive disease the lumen is very much smaller in terms of the diameter. So this is how the obstruction of the airway takes place. Now in emphysema, what really happens is that there is an airway which is at the moment very normally found out in the normal individual. Now what really happens is that due to the huge amount of the due to the engulfing of huge amount of the carbonaceous particles, or if a person again breathes or keeps on smoking for a longer period of time, then he or she will engulf huge amount of the carbonaceous particles. And what really turns out to be is that due to the engulfment of huge amount of the foreign particles or carbonaceous particles through this airway, now around this airway we know that there are certain dust cells, or there are some cells which are involved in the phagocytic activity. So there are some macrophages surrounding this airway, surrounding this respiratory tract. There are various kinds of neutrophils, monocytes, which will be stimulated if we keep on intaking these kind of carbonaceous particles in more and more amount. So due to the incoming of these foreign particles in heavy amount, the phagocytic cells surrounding the airway, let's just suppose these are the symbols of the phagocytic cells. So the macrophage surrounding this airway will become stimulated, and they will upgrade their activity of the phagocytosis. And when they upgrade their activity of the phagocytosis due to the incoming of the huge amount of the carbonaceous particles, then they spill out some of their proteolytic enzymes, and one of their proteolytic enzyme is elastases, okay, elastases. Because there is huge amount of the incoming of the carbonaceous particles due to smoking, that is the major reason why these macrophages become overactivated, and once they become overactivated, they spill out some of their digestive enzymes or their destructive enzymes, including proteolytic enzymes comprising elastases enzyme also. And these elastases enzymes destroy the elastic tissues surrounding the airway. So let us just suppose these are the elastic tissues. Now due to the spilling out of these elastases, these elastic tissues will be undergoing destruction. So there will be less amount of the elastic tissues in the obstructive disease, and we have already come across that this incoming force was due to the elastic recoil tendency of the lung. Now over here, as the elastic tissues are being damaged due to the presence of the elastases enzyme, now you say, will the elastic recoil tendency of this lung, will it be increased or decreased? Obviously it will be decreased due to the destruction of the elastic tissues over here. So as the elastic recoil tendency of the lung, or in another way you can say as the incoming force is being reduced, so the outgoing force exerted by the chest wall, will it be increased or decreased? Definitely it will be enhanced in terms of the number. So here, over here in the obstructive disease, the outgoing force is going to get a triumph over the incoming force or the inward force. That is the major reason why the lung will be expanded outward. It will be enlarged outward. You could see over here the lung is expanding outward and is being bigger in terms of the volume as compared to the normal lung due to the damage of the elastic tissues. And why does the damage of the elastic tissue occur? Because of the elastases secreted by the huge amount of the activity of the macrophages due to the incoming of the huge amount of the foreign particles over here through the airways. Now that is the major reason why over here in the obstructive disease we'll get to see an enlargement of the lung, and the problem will be associated with the airways, and the airways will become constricted, but there will be no problem with the lung parenchymal cells, and there will be less amount of the incoming force or inward force due to the loss of the elastic tissues, but more amount of the outward force. Okay, these are the normal 5 features which we have already come across between the 2 different diseases. Now I'm going to be writing down these 2 differences in a tabulated form so that you can get your eyes totally peeled into the main topic. Okay, let me just write down obstructive disease over here on the left side of my board, obstructive disease, and over here there will be restrictive disease. Okay, in the restrictive disease, lung was more stiff or less stiff? Definitely it was more stiff due to the deposition of various collagenous substances within the lung parenchymal cells. And in the obstructive disease, lung was less stiff or more stiff? Obviously less stiff, because had lungs been more stiff, then it would not have enlarged outward. Okay, that as it has enlarged, as the lung has been enlarged outward, that is the major reason why in the obstructive disease you will get to see the less stiffness of the lung. Now in case of the restrictive disease, will there be more compliance of the lung or less compliance of the lung? Definitely lung will be less compliant. To be able to expand the lung outward, we have to insert more amount of the energy, okay, more amount of the pressure. That means it will be very much harder for any individual to expand the lung outward in case of the restrictive disease. So it will become less compliant. And in obstructive disease, lung was already found out to be enlarged. That means it was already more compliant. That means there will be more compliancy of the lung. So lung will be more compliant in the obstructive disease and less compliant in the restrictive disease. Now you tell me, restrictive disease, okay, which part of the lung was associated with the restrictive disease? Was it airway or was it associated with the lung parenchymal cell? Definitely the answer is going to be lung parenchymal cell, because the lung parenchymal cell underwent either fibrotic damage, or the lung parenchymal cells might have undergone inflammation or might have undergone infectious spreading. That is the major reason we tell it to be an abnormality associated with parenchymal cells. So in the restrictive disease, we don't call restrictive disease an abnormality to be associated with airway disease. Again, this is a condition. Restrictive disease is a condition or pathological condition which is associated with the abnormality of the lung parenchymal cells. So it is not associated with the abnormality of the lung airway disease. Okay, because airways are found out to be abnormal in the obstructive disease. We have already seen the picture. That is why restrictive disease is associated with the abnormality of the parenchymal cells. So there will be abnormal parenchymal cells. Abnormal parenchymal cells. Now over here in the obstructive disease, will the parenchymal cells remain normal or abnormal? Definitely normal, because it is associated with the airway obstruction. So it is nowhere closer to the parenchymal cells obstruction or parenchymal cells abnormality. So the parenchymal cells will remain normal. Okay, but over here in the restrictive disease, will there be any kind of abnormality associated with the airway? Obviously no. So airways will be normal. Okay, but over here in the obstructive disease, will the airways be normal? Definitely no, because we have already seen the airways are becoming constricted due to the secretions of different cells. Okay, so the airway will no longer be normal in the obstructive disease. Airways will be abnormal. Okay, now as there is abnormality on both occasions, so the vital capacity is how much? Normally vital capacity is 4600 ml. Will it be normal in the restrictive disease or more in the restrictive disease? Obviously on both occasions vital capacity will be seen to be reduced. Vital capacity will be seen to be reduced on both occasions, because the lung is shifting from this normal condition two abnormal conditions on both occasions. So vital capacity will be seen to be reduced in both restrictive disease and obstructive disease. Now residual volume will be seen to be decreased in the restrictive disease, and residual volume will be seen to be increased in the obstructive disease. Now I have to explain this phenomenon, because I have explained all the 5 aforementioned phenomena well just prior to writing down this tabulated form of the differences, but I haven't mentioned the increase of the residual volume, neither have I mentioned why there is decrease of the residual volume in the restrictive disease. So I am coming to that. Normally, what is the amount of the residual volume? It is obviously 1200 ml. So let us just suppose that this is your lung, and normally you are taking the air 500 ml during tidal inspiration. Similarly, you are throwing the same amount of the air out during the tidal expiration. So you are exchanging between these two places. Okay. Now after tidal expiration, what is there? There is forceful expiration, which is ERV, and that amounts to how much? That amounts to approximately 1100 ml. Now you have already completed your forceful expiration, which is ERV. Even after ERV, there will be some amount of the air which you cannot throw out of your lung. Okay, in spite of trying huge amount of the effort, in spite of doing too much, in spite of putting huge amount of the attempt, even though you have been able to throw out 1100 ml out of your lung, you will not be allowed, or you will not be able to throw out some amount of the air within your lung. That is the reason why that amount of the air which you are not being able to throw out is known as residual volume, and it amounts to how much? It amounts to 1200 ml normally. Okay. Now residual volume will be increased in the obstructive disease and decreased in the restrictive disease. Why? I am coming to that issue. Normally in the obstructive disease, what really happens, I have already shown you the picture, that this is your airway, and due to the heavy inflammation or due to the super stimulation of the glands surrounding this airway, or due to the huge amount of the upgradation of the macrophagocytic activity, there may be any kind of obstruction with the airways. Okay, so let's just suppose these are the obstructions. Now normally what happens, you are taking 500 ml of the air inward, and during expiration, during normal tidal expiration, you have to also throw the same amount of the air outward what you have inspired inward during the time of the tidal inspiration. That means if you take 500 ml of the air inward, and so you have to throw 500 ml of the air outward also to maintain the normal rhythm and pattern of the respiration. Normally, if your airways are in this structure where there is no obstruction, during tidal inspiration you take 500 ml of the air. Okay, that is fine, that is within the normal range. And same thing you are throwing out during the tidal expiration, which is 500 ml of the air. But due to any reason, due to the obstruction, if you are not allowed to throw the same amount of the air outward, and let's just suppose you are throwing less than 500 ml of the air outward during the time of the tidal expiration, then the amount of the air that you are not being able to throw out during the tidal expiration, that will be added to the residual volume. Again, it worth repeating once more. What am I trying to say is that, for an example, here normally you have taken 500 ml of the air inward. So normally during the time of the tidal expiration, you have to throw the same amount of the air which you have already inspired in during the time of the inspiration, which is 500 ml. That means you are taking 500 ml inward, and you have to also throw 500 ml of the air outward. This is the phenomenon which occurs normally. Now abnormally, when there is any obstruction, as you could see, there is an obstruction, and during the time of the inspiration, the airways move outward because the lung inflates. So it doesn't matter whether there is any obstruction in your lung or not, but as your lungs are expanding during the time of the inspiration, so 500 ml of the air moves into my lung, even though there is any obstruction. Okay, even though there is any decrease of the diameter of this lumen of the airway, yet 500 amount of the air moves to my lung when the lung is moving outward, because that time my airways are going outward. The walls of the airways are going outward from each other. That is the major reason why it allows 500 ml of the air to move into my internal part of the lung during the time of the inspiration, tidal inspiration. Okay, but during the time of the tidal expiration, normally the wall of the airway comes closer to each other because it tries to squeeze inward. So during the time of the tidal expiration in the obstructive disease, as there is already secretions out here, as there is already presence of obstruction in the airway, so when it tries to squeeze inward, it kinds of creates a huge barrier to throw out some amount of the air which it has already taken inward. That means it doesn't allow the same amount of the air which it has already taken inward during the time of the inspiration. So instead of throwing out 500 ml of the air outward during the time of the expiration, it throws out some amount of the air which is below the level of 500 ml. Like for example, let's just say instead of throwing 500 ml of the air, it allows 300 ml of the air to be expelled during the time of the tidal expiration. Because there is obstruction, so it's not going to allow the same amount of the passage of the air to move outward from the interior part of the lung. Now you could see there is an imbalance of 200 ml, because if you subtract 300 ml with 500 ml, it will be approximately 200 ml. So you could see 200 ml of the air being deposited into your lung, and these 200 ml of the air will be added to the residual volume, because residual volume is that volume of the air which cannot be excreted out of your lung. So here you could see I have thrown out 300 ml, but I haven't been able to throw out this 200 ml out of the 500 ml which I have already taken inward. So this extra 200 ml will be added to the normal residual volume, which is 1200 ml, and by adding this extra 200 ml with 1200 ml, now my residual volume will be right now 1400 ml. Now that is the major reason why you could see residual volume to be increased over here you will see residual volume to be enhanced, and over here residual volume will be found out to be decreased, because in restricted disease it is not associated with the obstruction of the airway. So the airway remains the same, but due to the stiffness, residual volume will remain low in the restricted disease. But in the obstructive disease, residual volume will be found out to be increased. Now this is a very tricky area which you should keep it in mind, because it will definitely clear all of your concepts. Okay. Now after residual volume, what really comes is that total lung capacity. Total lung capacity. It is equal to how much? It is equal to 5800 ml, and we have already learned the formula of the total lung capacity. Total lung capacity is equal to ERV plus IRV plus tidal volume plus residual volume. Now what really happens is that residual volume is found out to be increased in the obstructive disease. So total lung capacity will keep up the pace with residual volume. So when residual volume is found out to be increased in the obstructive disease, total lung capacity will also be increased because of the increase of the residual volume. Same thing will be applicable in an opposite direction in case of the restrictive disease also. In the restrictive disease, residual volume I have already mentioned will be low or high. Definitely residual volume in the case of the restrictive disease will be low. Now if residual volume is found out to be low, then TLC will also be low. So total lung capacity will be also low in the restrictive disease. Okay. Now another thing that you have to put it in your mind is that if the ratio of FEV1 and forced vital capacity, it will be less in the obstructive disease, and the ratio between forced expiratory volume 1 and forced vital capacity, it will remain normal in the restricted disease. Okay. What are these words I'm going to be explaining? So these are the all differences between obstructive disease and restrictive disease. Now I'm coming to this issue. Okay. So forced vital capacity is nothing but the type of the vital capacity which you are doing forcefully. Normally what is vital capacity? After the deep inspiration, the maximum amount of the air which you are being successfully able to throw out is known as vital capacity. Okay. And Same thing will be applicable here, but this time this vital capacity is done forcefully. That is why it's called forced vital capacity. That means you are taking the deep inspiration, as much of the air as you can actually inspire in, and after the deep inspiration you are holding the air for a little second like this. I'm holding my breath, that means I'm holding the expiration, and after holding my breath, after the completion of the deep inspiration, now I'll be excreting every droplet of the air out as hard as possible, as fast as possible. Now this phenomenon is called forced vital capacity. Okay, it is you can for your better assumption you can compare it with the vital capacity, or in another word you can say it is a type of the vital capacity for your better conception. And forced expiratory volume means that how much of the air you are being able to throw out in the first second when you are excreting the air outward after the deep inspiration. So I'm going to be showing these two cases with the help of a diagram so that it lasts in your memory for too long. Okay. So let's just say this is a graph, and across the x-axis I'm going to be plotting time, and across the y-axis I'm going to be inserting volume. Okay. Now what really happens is that this is the position A. At position A, I've already completed my my deep inspiration. That means I've taken everything, whatever is possible in my way, like this way. Okay. That means I have already completed my deep inspiration or forceful inspiration. Now from here on, I'll be throwing everything out of my lung. Okay. And this excretion has to be done very forcefully. Okay, like this way. I've taken everything, and I'm holding my breath for a little time, and then I'm throwing everything out. This is called FVC. Okay, and let's just suppose I've thrown everything out of my lung like this way. It was at 0 level, and let's just suppose my forced vital capacity is 5 liter. So I've thrown everything out. Okay, so my forced vital capacity is how much? 5 liter, because after the deep inspiration I've thrown 5 liter of the air out of my lung into the outer atmospheric source of the air. Okay. Now what is FEV1? Forced expiratory volume. Okay, as I've already mentioned earlier that this across this x-axis I'll be plotting time. So let us just suppose this is after 1 second, or I should be saying that this is after 1 second. Okay, this is after 2 seconds. Okay, now you could see within 2 seconds I've thrown out my entire 5 liter out of my lung. Now how much of the 5 liter can you be able to throw out in the first second is known as FEV1. That's also called forced expiratory volume. Okay, out of the 5, that is 5 liter is the whole amount of the air that you have already thrown out. Now out of this 5 air in the first second, okay, within the first second, how much of the air that you have thrown out of your lung is known as forced expiratory volume 1. Okay, and if it was like FEV2, then you would have considered it with the second. That means how much of the air that you have thrown out within 2 seconds is known as FEV2. Similarly, had it been FEV3, then you would have said that how much of the air you are being able to throw out in the first 3 seconds. Okay. Anyways, our headache will be to understand this FEV1, not to go to FEV2 or FEV3. Anyways, FEV1, that means out of this 5 liter, how much of the air you are being able to throw out is known as FEV1. Now let us just suppose that this indicates 4 liter, and in the first second I have thrown out 4 liter. Okay. Overall I have thrown out 5 liter, but out of 5 liter, 4 liter came out in the first second. So let us just calculate the ratio FEV1 divided by FVC. So our FVC was approximately 5 liter. Okay, and FEV1 was how much? 4 liter. So it will be approximately 0.8, and if you express it in terms of the percentage, then it will be approximately 80%. Okay, that means normally when your lung is functioning within the normal range, this ratio will be approximately 80%. But in the restrictive disease, when your lung will be restricted, or when the vital capacity of your lung will be reduced, that time what turns out to be is that, let us just suppose this is x-axis, and we'll plot time across the x-axis and volume across the y-axis, and our vital capacity was normally how much? Our vital capacity was normally at 5 liter. But as it is restrictive disease, so vital capacity will be reduced and it will be somewhere approximately 2 liter. Okay, let us just suppose our vital capacity or FVC will be 2 liter. And within the first second, out of this 2 liter, I'll be able to throw out, let's just suppose 1.6 liter. So, okay, so my FEV1 is approximately 1.6 liter, because out of this entire 2 liter, I've been able to throw out 1.6 liter within the first second. So my FEV1 is 1.6 liter and my FEV forced expiratory or forced vital capacity FVC is approximately 2 liter. So my ratio, okay, my ratio is FEV1 divided by FVC is 1.6 divided by 2 liter, 0.8, and if it is expressed in terms of the percentage, then it will turn out to be 80%. So even in the restrictive disease, the ratio between FEV1 and FVC remains 80%, which is normal. Okay, that means there is no airway obstruction. Okay, some of the people become very much confused, and some of the people become very much so confused that they say that the ratio between FEV1 and FVC will be reduced even in the restrictive disease, but it's not the truth, because there is no obstruction in the airways in case of the restrictive disease. So the ratio between FEV1 and FVC will remain normal around 80%. But in the obstructive disease, what really happens is that the vital capacity, let's just suppose, will be decreased, because on both occasions vital capacity was found out to be decreased, and instead of 5 liter, let's just say the vital capacity will be 4 liter, and within the first second, out of this 4 liter, let's just suppose 2 liter of the air will be thrown out within the first second. So FEV1 is approximately 2 liter and FVC is 4 liter. Now if you divide this 2 liter with 4 liter, it will turn out to be approximately 0.5, and if you express this ratio in terms of the percentage, then it will result in 50%. So in the chronic obstructive disease, especially in the obstructive diseases, the ratio between FEV1 and FVC will be found out to be below the level of the 70, which is abnormal, and over here we have seen 50%. The ratio is approximately 50%. So the ratio between FEV1 and FVC in the obstructive disease will be found out to be very low, but in the restrictive disease it will remain the normal. So this is all about the differences between the restrictive disease and obstructive disease. Hope you have liked the video, and through the video I am very much optimistic that you have already cleared all your doubts pertaining to these two differences of the two different conditions, pathological conditions. And if you have liked the video, then make sure that you remain subscribed to our channel and also share this channel with your friends. This is Joy signing off from today's video.